Hello, I'm Ro Cambridge. I'm 63. I'm a writer. You know, all of us on this stage today have been asked to do the impossible, to cram our messy lives into just 6 minutes. That's only 1 minute for each decade of our lives. Let me list just some of what happened in my life in the decade before the photograph and the exhibition was taken, and you'll realise just how impossible the task is. First, I burned out totally in a job that I loved, but I had to leave. I moved to a new city. I sold a house. I bought a house. I sold a house. I got married, went to live in the country, divorced, moved back to the city. I became good friends with my ex-husband. I was unemployed for a while. I worked at 5 or 6 different jobs. I began earning my living as a writer. I got caught up in a lengthy legal dispute. My dearest friend died, slowly, of a head injury. And I suddenly developed an autoimmune disorder which disabled me for several years. So tonight, I'm going to focus on just one thing about my life. The rest of my life will stay in the shadow. A bit like the photograph of me in the exhibition. What you can see is a half-naked woman wrapped in words, staring defiantly into the camera. There's a lot you can't see though. The varicose veins and the stretch marks for a start. But what you really can't see is the kid I used to be in that photograph. But she's there in the shadow. She tags along wherever I go, even though I wish sometimes she would not. I call her my inner State House kid. Hearing and being heard were very problematic in this little kid's family. Her mum was deaf. Her dad was a violent alcoholic. Her parents divorced when she was 4 or 5, and so she moved house and schools a lot. Maybe because of that, the State House kid was a thumbsucker and a bedwetter and a sleepwalker long after she should have grown out of it. There was no DPB in those days, so her mum worked at cleaning and sewing jobs. There was never much money, no phone, no car. This kid's mum's ear problems meant balance problems, so she used to ride a big 3-wheeler bicycle. The State House kid was ashamed of her mother and ashamed of being ashamed of her. Sometimes when things were tough, this little kid and her mother lived with her grandparents. Her grandfather was a bully. Whenever this kid or her mum tried to speak, he'd slap the table and say, "Silence is golden! Silence is golden!" There was a poster on the wall in one of the houses we lived in. It was tacked up above the Formica dining table. It said, "God is the unseen guest at every meal, the unheard listener to every conversation." God stayed invisible. But if anyone was listening, it must have been him, because nobody else did. Least of all to anything that I had to say. Books were my escape hatch. They reassured me that beyond my own family there were other worlds, other ways of talking and thinking and being. I left home as soon as I could. The State House kid came with me. We got older, but we didn't grow up or become any happier. We spent a lot of time with our heads in a book and looking for love in all the wrong places. For a long time, I thought that the State House kid was all that I was and would ever be. Ashamed, uncertain, anxious, and most of all, unheard. Then, in my 50s, almost, but not quite by chance, I was invited to write a monthly magazine column. Then I was invited to write a fortnightly newspaper column. I had permission to write about anything at all, as long as it wasn't libelous. So that's what I did. Very nervously at first, I only wrote about little things, what I noticed when I was out walking with my dog, about living in a very tiny flat, about op shopping, about what a terrible housekeeper I am, about how financially precarious my life is sometimes, about being sick or depressed, about books and movies I loved, and sometimes I just wrote completely mad things, sheer flights of fancy. For quite a long time, writing those columns was like putting a message into a bottle and throwing it into the ocean. I never knew if anyone ever found them or read them. But then gradually people began responding. There'd be a letter to the editor, a phone call, or I'd be introduced to someone and they'd say, "Oh, you write those columns in the paper, don't you? I love them. Or they'd say, I loved that column about such and such. I sent it to my daughter. Or I stuck it on the fridge. Or I sent it, I put it on the notice board at work. Or they'd say things like, you said exactly what I feel or was thinking. Or they'd say, I couldn't stop laughing. There are two things that are miraculous about this for me. Firstly, it's that the State House Kid has found her voice, and at least a few listeners. Secondly, and this is the most miraculous, I know that sometimes something that I've written touches someone else's life in some way. I might not ever hear about it or meet the person, but I know that sometimes words that I've put on a page will make someone laugh or cry or think. That something I've written will make someone feel less of a misfit, less ashamed of being just who they are, or maybe a little bit less lonely. That's what other writers did for me in the State House Kid. Now I'm repaying the debt. In the scale of things, I know it's no big deal. I haven't won the Booker Prize or a Pulitzer. I haven't ended world hunger or climbed Mount Everest. But for me, this is truly a miracle. If you've ever heard of Douglas Adams, you probably know that he wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. When Douglas Adams was asked to sum up his life, he said something which rings absolutely true for me and probably for a lot of women when they reach their 60s. This is what he said. I may not have gone where I intended to go, but I think I've ended up where I needed to be. Thank you.